Welcome. Today we will be talking about debt, one of the most common ways people usually interact with anything interest related. You probably have had some in your past, be it some kind of a student loan, a personal loan, maybe something for a new car, or perhaps you've already decided to buy your own house and you got a mortgage. Depending on how you use it, each and every one of these debts can be well utilized and can be useful, or it can be quite devastating for your future. Unfortunately, since most of these types of debt are fairly varied depending on where you live, which country, which kind of banks you go to for that loan, I can't really go into exact detail for your personal situation, but I plan to give you a general rundown of how you should think about debt, how you should approach it, what how likely you should be to take on debt for your situation. Everything in this video is of course purely for educational purposes. I'm not supposed to, nor am I willing to give personalized or any sort of an advice here, financial advice. I'm merely going to show how I would think about these situations, how I would analyze them, and the decision is all yours as to how you'll implement this knowledge. First and foremost, I'd like to state, for the record, that unlike many financial advisors, I'm not exactly against debt to begin with. I think it can be a very useful tool if you did proper research on it and have put enough thought into its uses. Be careful, not afraid, would be my motto in this case. You should always be very mindful when taking on a debt. You should always carefully consider your situation, whether how much you really need it and what the potential return on that debt could be. If you believe, having done all the working out, the math part of the equations, and you believe that you'll come out on top, you'll earn more than you lose through the interest from that debt, then it's definitely a safe investment. Otherwise, I would definitely try to find a different approach to solving my problem. That's, even in that case, can still be the solution at the end, but in that case I would be very careful. What do I mean by coming out ahead? It's actually a bit of a misconception to think that debts are only there to lose money for you. You can actually, if you play them right and have analyzed it correctly, you can come out ahead and can actually make money with your debts. Not in a very strict sense, so in one-dimensionally you will always pay back more than you got. However, if your investment or what you use your money for grows in value more than the debt interest accumulates, then you will come out ahead, and the debt was well worth it to take on. Let's take mortgages as our first example. It is no surprise that for most of us, buying our own houses out of our savings is a very, very difficult exercise in futility in one sense. It would take 10 to 20 years to save up enough, even if you have a decent salary, to buy a house just outright. However, the only other option, since we do have to live somewhere, is to rent a flat or a house somewhere, which will constantly drain our funds, which will make it even harder for us to save up enough cash to just outright buy a house. So what can you do? I guess you will have to go to the banks for it and ask for a mortgage. So in the next part, we're going to analyze it a bit to see if taking on a mortgage is well worth it or not. In the next video, however, we will go over on whether you should rent, when you should rent or buy a house for your own financial situations. But for now, let's just go with the base mortgage setting. Can you come out on top from buying a house? So let's say you are thinking about buying a house. You have around 30,000 saved up, which is just enough as a down payment for a house costing around 150,000. With an interest rate of 3.67%, which is around what you would get in the USA. It may be a bit higher, a bit lower, depending on credit scores and other things. With the 30-year option, you would have a monthly payment of around $715. If you did the calculations, then you would get that overall your house is going to cost you around 257,400 US dollars. You end up paying almost double of what your house is originally worth it. How can I say that it can be a good choice then? Well, you must take into account that you have to live somewhere anyway, and renting is not cheap either. If you can rent the same or a very similar house for just $600 a month, you are getting a really great deal on that. In the 30 years, that rent would cost you a total of $216,000. Now you may say at this point that you are still $40,000 ahead in life if you had rented the place than if you had bought it. However, you must also consider that by the end of the 30th year, you are the proud owner of a house worth at least $150,000, which will push you ahead by $100,000 compared to the one who only rents. In reality, especially if you are really good at handling money, the difference would be much smaller, may even turn around at times, which is why I will make the in-depth video discussing when you should rent and when you should buy a house. Another loan, which we must evaluate, although it will be a bit harder, would be some kind of a student loan or maybe a business loan. It's harder to evaluate because it's kind of an investment into the future, so whether it pays off will depend on a lot of things. But I do consider them together since both of them simply prioritizes the future. In these cases, it's very important to consider whether our desires are with them. What do I mean by that? For instance, in case of a student loan. If you really want to become a doctor, for instance, that will cost you a lot of money up front in the form of university and all the education. Now, you can finance that and you can go through the university, and chances are that if you succeed, you will earn a decent amount as a doctor once you're practicing, so you will make up for the lost time and money that you put into this investment. However, it also requires you that you want to do this, because unless you do and all you're ever concerned about is your financial needs and there are no other desires there, then I would suggest taking a good look and using a calculator for a little bit, because chances are that going through university may not be worth it if you're only after money. As a small calculation, let's say you graduate in 5 years. This will cost you around 50,000 US dollars, which you would get at around a 6% interest rate. I'm being quite generous here. This degree will end up costing you almost $1,000 every month for the next 5 years once you start working. If someone, on the other hand, earns around $2,500 a month without a degree, they can put aside around 1,000 of it towards a 4% return investment, they would have a portfolio worth around 67,500 US dollars by the time the university students graduate. Not start working, just graduate. For the next 5 years, the graduate works for $3,500 a month. That's around $42K a year, which is after taxes, which is not a bad salary for someone with no work experience at all. They also pay $1,000 into a similar portfolio as the non-graduate, but they also have to pay $1,000 for their student loan. In 5 years, the non-graduate portfolio will reach around $150,000, while the graduates have just reached the $67,500 that the non-graduate had when our student graduated. From here is where it gets real, because now the graduate would be able to get much better pays for similar jobs, although it really depends on the degree. But let's say that he increased his income to a level of around 5,000 a month. Their lifestyle did not change, so overall they can now save $3,500 since they no longer have to pay off the student debt. They are already done with that. Even with these really large differences, notice that it still takes around 3 more years for the degree wielder to overcome in net worth the portfolio of the non-degree holder, the non-graduate. Also notice that in this hyper-idealistic scenario, I did not increase at any point the non-graduate's salary, even though in reality he has at this point 10 years of experience, so their salary would be much higher than this as well. But even this way, where I was really considerate for the degree holder, it still took them around until the age of 30, 31, until they can get on the same level as the non-graduate. Make of this what you may. In a sense, you can even say that this calculation just kind of proved that you should get a degree, since you will most likely end up working into your 60s. But you must also take into consideration that the differences in salaries may be far more negligible than I showed in this calculation. After all, the non-degree wielder does have a 5-year work experience advantage over the degree holder, and we must also consider that depending on what your degree is, it may be with far less pay potential, or it may be far less desirable. Basically, if you're not going into law, some kind of a STEM field, or finances, your degree will probably not be worth as much as someone who just started working some other kind of job. So if you're at the stage of your life where you need to decide on whether you should go to a university, whether to get a degree, taking a close look at whether your heart really pulls you towards one of the majors is very important. Because if the answer is, not really, and there's a very good chance that simply going towards something non-university related may be the best outcome for you, monetarily speaking. As far as business loans are concerned, it's just too varied to say anything about it. All I can say is do a lot of calculations, talk with literally everyone you know, make sure you understand your business very well before you really take on that loan, and make sure you have a very clear idea as to where your returns will come from, how much is realistic, always undershoot in your estimations, and make sure that the return on investment is not too long, so it will be worth it for you in the long run. If you cannot do all of these calculations, then my advice is to just not do it and try to get by without that loan. As for car loans, I would suggest just not using them. The only time I would really see a really good point for using a car loan is if you do not have money saved up and you do something as a job, something that really requires you to have something under you. In that case, you kind of have no other choice, so you have to take some kind of a loan to get that car. In that case, it's fine. Usually, I would simply buy a used car, definitely 6 to 8 years already in the market. That way, its value have already lost what it would lose normally, and who knows, maybe in a few years when you wish to switch, you're in a better economical situation or whatnot, you can just sell it off for around the same money you bought it from. Otherwise, just buy it from saved money. It wouldn't be that expensive if you follow this simple rule as well. Buying new cars is pretty much a luxury. You should only do that if you are really stable financially. You shouldn't probably even watch these videos because they are not for you. You're already rich. In that case, yeah, sure, buy a new car. but be aware that around half of its value is already lost as soon as you leave, as soon as you take it to the first drive. As far as personal loans are concerned, no. Okay, it's a bit more complex than that. Pretty much the only time I can recommend a personal loan is if you're in a case of emergency, like your fridge breaks down when you have zero savings. You pretty much have to get that fridge because we can no longer live without a refrigerator today. And yes, buying a new iPhone or whatnot is not an emergency, so just don't. If you cannot buy these kind of luxuries from your currently saved up money or from your cash that you earned, don't buy them. You cannot afford them at this point. You need to make yourself more financially stable so you can later on afford these luxuries. If you really feel like you cannot live without one of these, my advice would be to simply slowly save up. You can live without it for a few months, and in a few months' time, you can save it up. Just make sure it doesn't cut too deeply into your budget. So you're fine. You don't take on any loans. You don't lose out on not investing the amount you're normally investing. As for credit cards, well, they are a double-edged sword. There are kind of three kinds of people, and most of society is unfortunately in one of two groups. One are people who are afraid of credit cards, they either because they've been burned before or simply because they know that it just wouldn't be able to handle it, and so they keep away. The second big group are people who use them a lot without having any knowledge on how they actually work and how you should use them. Out of these two big groups, the one who never uses them does it right. So unfortunately, if you do not know how to use a credit card, or if you tend to forget about paying off your debt that you accumulate, do not owe a credit card. Have some self-knowledge and reflect on yourself enough to just get rid of it or learn how to use them. But please do not misuse credit cards. If you misuse them, they are the same as personal loans, basically, which I'm quite against, as you've heard. The small minority of people, the third, are the ones who actually know how to use credit cards. This small group of people will actually benefit a lot from them, because if you do know how to use them, they are a great tool, especially in countries where credit scores exist, for instance. So if you live in America, for instance, if you have a credit card which you use and you use it correctly, in other words, you never pay interest. That's very important. If you ever pay interest with your credit card, you don't know how to use it, and you should get rid of it or learn how to use it. But those who know how to use it, how to really take advantage of it, will benefit a lot from credit cards. So I would heavily suggest learning how to use one and having enough consideration towards yourself that if you feel like you cannot truly master how to use a credit card, just don't owe any. Because getting into huge debts is really not fun and can ruin your life. So healthy caution is what I would advise, and do your research. If you do your research and pay attention, have the willpower to really pull you through, then you will eventually learn how to make great use of a credit card, which will save you a lot of money then. Otherwise, just be cautious, not afraid, is my baseline for this too. As for how to use a credit card properly, in a very generalized fashion, one, learn the date of when you have to pay back everything you spent on it with 0% interest. Know that by heart, tattoo it on your forehead, save it in your phone, make sure every person around you knows to let you know that you have to pay that religiously. If you do that, you will make fine work. But there is an easier way. In today's society, pretty much all credit card companies or banks, most likely, will have a function where you can set up your own account, your bank account, to get to instantly refill your credit card when the time comes around. If you set this up, this will automate this process for you, so you won't have to remember. The only downfall to this is if you don't keep close watch on your account and you overspend with your credit card. In that case, that's a big no-no. Make sure you always have enough savings, or your credit card limit is much lower than the amount of money that you have on your savings or with the account that you used for this refilling. Outside of this, credit cards have great functions if you really learn how to use them. I will quickly go over these great functions now. Number one of its advantages is it increases your reach. Now this is the downfall, so be very careful with this one. It's basically self-explanatory. It basically gives you 2 months worth of salary in a sense, or maybe a bit more, but hopefully your limit is a bit lower than your salary. Be very careful with this one because that's how people usually overspend. So only use it in case of emergency. Usually how I would do it is to use only the credit card to buy stuff, to use up my salary basically, and use my salary to just refill the credit card. And I will never spend my salary. I will only spend from the credit card, and the salary will refill the credit card. So in a sense, it's almost like I get my salary onto the credit card. But in case of an emergency, where I really need access to a larger amount of money right now, then it's there, and then I have 2 months worth of salary, maybe even a bit more that I can spend on this emergency. Do prioritize paying off the debt you accumulate through this though. The second advantage can be as a sort of a budgeting tool. If you set your limit correctly, preferably really low, then you can use it to always know how much you have left for that month. So if you know your monthly spending is like $300 and you have a credit card with a limit of $300, then you know that as soon as you reach that limit, then you can no longer spend to keep your budget clean. This is a great tool if you start using your card from the beginning this way, because it basically saves you 1 month of spending money. Since if you think about it, the first month you start using your card, you do not use up that $300 from your current salary, and you will pay back this first month of spendings from your next month's salary. So that $300 you basically get to keep. However, that only lasts until you keep this up. The moment you cut out the credit card for a month, then you will have to put that $300 back. So that's kind of still just floating that money, but still, if you keep using the credit card, it will remain yours. A big weakness of this, however, is that banks tend to increase your limit over time, especially if you're good at keep paying back the money, which is a big problem for this. Unfortunately, it would be great if that was a function that you could just disable, but as far as I know, in most cases you cannot do that, and your limit will keep increasing, and as it increases, this function slowly becomes more and more dangerous. So be careful and pay attention to your limit. 3. By using a credit card, you can increase your credit score, in most countries at least. Make sure to check it out, whether it works in your countries or not. But in the USA, it definitely does work. This basically means that by using these mini loans through the credit card, your banks realize that you're a very good client, so they will offer you much better deals on your loans or mortgages in the future. This is essential if you want to buy your own house and get a good deal, and is absolutely indispensable if you want to work in real estate, or if you want to invest yourself into real estate, because buying houses at much better deals with much better mortgages, much better loans, will make a huge difference in the long run. It can quite literally turn an okay deal into very, very profitable one. Finally, in today's credit card saturated market, there are plenty of other incentives to use credit cards, which you get through companies fighting against each other to get you to buy their credit card or use their credit card. This can be in a form of some kind of a cashback function where you get a percentage back from your pays. It can be some kind of a function like getting into lounges at airports. If you fly a lot, that can be a very nice extra feature. It can be some kind of a point system that you can gather from paying and then buy something from it or use it for some other functions. This can be very nice and should be considered when you decide on a credit card. So overall, long story short on credit cards, do your research, make sure you pay attention, know yourself, and if all of these work, go ahead, they will help you a lot in your life. But if you know that you wouldn't put in the research, or you know that you don't have the best self-control when it comes to impulse buying, I would stay away. In the next video we will talk about how to tackle that. Let's say this video already came a bit too late, you're already well in that, and how you should or could tackle it in a very effective sense, and how you can climb out and maybe even get out ahead on top of your debt, but at the very least to get rid of it so you can start anew and begin your financial investment with a smile instead of a very stressed and sweaty outlook on life. So until then, thank you for watching, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.